All right. Hello and welcome everybody to the general commission meeting for the Northampton Policing Review Commission. Um, we'll be meeting today to discuss a lot of what we've done so far and what we're planning on to present at the public hearing, as well as touching on a few other things. This meeting will be recorded and accessible on Northampton Open Media afterwards. The first thing that we have in for our agenda is to do a roll call, and then we'll open up to public comment. Noah, can you do a quick call for us?
Yeah. Dan?
Yeah, present.
Nick?
Yes, here.
David?
Present.
Alex?
Here.
Carmen? Not here. Javier?
Here.
Dana?
Here.
Carol? Carol's not here. Namdi?
Here.
Michael? Not here. Josie?
Here.
Cynthia?
Here.
Lois?
Here.
Elizabeth? Not here. And Booker?
Here.
All right. So we have reached a quorum. I miscounted on there. All right, so we have the next thing is just the approval of the minutes from the previous meetings that Noah sent around earlier. And that should be, does anyone have any amendments to those minutes?
I move acceptance of the minutes.
Second.
Awesome. We don't need to vote on that, do we? Right.
We do have to vote on it.
Sure, let's vote on it.
Cynthia had requested an edit on one of the things that she said, I think, and was curious whether to talk about that here or just via email. I'm happy to just change that one line. And then otherwise, if you want to vote on it, great. I'm not sure exactly how that works.
It was very minor. It was just a comment about when we're talking about public hearings being live, and I made a comment that could be violating our COVID regulations. So it wasn't distinguished that public hearing. We had a discussion about it being live, so I wanted to insert the word live. But we don't need to waste our time in this. We're not sure what the procedure should be for amending minutes. Just tell Noah or whatever. Small issue. We can move on.
Alex?
Yeah, in city council, we have what's called Scrivener's errors. And if they're just a minor change, there's no approval needed. We don't have to go over the detail of it. It's only if something was beyond that we would want to, say the new language out loud in the meeting, and then we would vote.
Yeah.
All right. So in that case, if this is something minor, so we'll just drop that in it. We'll just do a quick approval. Noah, can you go through us again?
I can. Dan?
Yes.
Nick?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Alex?
Yes.
Javier?
Yes.
Dana?
Yes.
Namdi?
Yes.
Josie?
Yes.
Cynthia?
Yes.
Lois?
Yes.
Booker?
Yes.
All right, so minutes are approved, which is great. So the next bit that we have is public comment. So we'll handle these just like we have in the past. So if anyone would like to make a public comment, please use the raise hand feature in Zoom. Down on the bottom, if you select participants, in the participant panel that opens up or pops up if you're on a Mac, use the raise hand at the bottom there to raise your hand, and we'll call on you in the order in which the hand was raised. Everyone has 3 minutes. And actually, speaking of that, I need to grab my phone to have the timer up. So we'll get that started. All right. Wait for Candace to get in as well. Okay, there we go. So it looks like, sorry, Ashwin, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Great. Hello, my name is Ashwin Ravi Kumar. I live in Amherst, but spend an awful lot of time in Northampton and love it very much. I am an assistant professor of environmental studies at Amherst College, and I also serve on Amherst's, the town of Amherst's Energy and Climate Action Committee, which means I know what goes into doing the work that you all do on commissions like this, and thank you so much for your service here. And I am speaking to encourage this commission to be really bold and really imaginative as you craft recommendations for the town of Northampton. And in particular, to really consider being as bold as proposing the creation of new agencies and institutions to deliver community safety and justice. From big municipalities like Minneapolis to Austin, Texas, there are plans in the works to create new structures outside of the police to deliver community safety in a real way. More locally, at places like Amherst College, where I teach, they are building new departments, new agencies for restorative practices and restorative justice. The understanding that is common in these cases being that the transformative demands and the values expressed by the movement for Black lives cannot be realized by police, and they really can't be realized by existing agencies at all. It calls fundamentally for new structures with a different set of mandates, a different set of competencies and expertise, and different structures of accountability, crucially. And I would really hope that a new type of agency in Northampton that can deliver on a lot of these things, whether it's mental health services, responses for people who are harmed by domestic violence, all kinds of other things, services for unhoused people, will be directly accountable to the communities that are most harmed and who the agency seeks to serve. And that could look a lot of different ways. There's great ways to do this. This could be, a board that is intentionally staffed by folks representing those communities. It could be other types of structures that are in place that you can be really imaginative of to have new ways to be accountable and new ways to organize delivering these key services. But the key is to really be outside of the police fundamentally, to recognize that the police can't really deliver these types of services effectively, and to think really boldly about how to create new agencies or structures within Northampton to do that. I know that there's lots of procedural barriers that might make you feel like you can't make those kinds of recommendations, and I would encourage you to be really aspirational as you do this. Others around the country are doing it. The movement, I think, demands it. And I think that people will have your backs if you make these types of bold recommendations. So thank you so much. I yield my time.
All right, thank you. The next in the list is Jose Adastra.
Hi, everyone. I am a Northampton resident, and I organize locally to try to provide solutions for our local houseless population. And I just want to second everything that Ashwin just said and really drive the point home that we should not be encouraging any systems where police are involved in the new solution, because after hundreds of years, it's beyond any reasonable doubt that they can't provide it. As one of the organizers that's most familiar with the people here, the police are part of the problem. They're part of the trauma. They're part of why people get so upset with their interactions between, you know, people who are supposed to come in force and fix everything, like they get upset by the sight of their badges and uniforms. So I would like to encourage you to listen to Ashwin and really propose some like really aspirational changes. And I'd like to remind you that hundreds of us were on the streets demanding change, and the local government and mayor put this commission in place. And if we don't come out of this with really serious, bold, you know, imaginative solutions, I just want everyone here to realize we're all inside and warm, and people are outside on the street. People that I know already have died this winter. And people are suffering, and they're cold and they're hungry and they're getting sick. And this was the city's solution, this board. So while we're all inside doing our studies, sending each other articles and emails, you know, people are dying, and they're gonna be incarcerated probably before we can actually come up with solutions. So I just want to remind you to, you know, if we don't come out of this with real solutions that don't involve the police, it's just going to be another year of people suffering for no reason while the city kind of just delays. So I encourage you to really take that seriously. Remember that death is here, death is now. It's this season where people on the street die of, you know, of various reasons, of cold, of hunger, and some because they're sick of it and they overdose and die. So, you know, remember what's happening on the street, and really, I encourage you to move forward with really inspiring abolition-based action. Thank you.
All right. So next up is Sean. Oops, sorry.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you everybody for hosting us as in a public comment right now. My name is Sean Donovan. I live in Northampton in Ward 3, but I've also worked for a local organization for 8 years now called the Western Mass Recovery Learning Community, and I wanted to share a bit about that. And I think it's fairly in line with what Jose and Ashwin just shared, that you know, the group that I work for is a peer-led organization. So people who have themselves struggled with the experiences that they're supporting others to live through and work through, whether that's like being kept in psychiatric hospitals, being incarcerated, being homeless, dealing with trauma, and, you know, leading others in that practice, in healing from that. But the reason I share that is because I know that many people in my greater community have been really negatively impacted by the police involvement in any so-called mental health care. And I haven't had a chance to come to this meeting in a while, but I spoke, I think in October or September, about the idea of like wellness checks. It's a euphemism for when the cops respond to someone else in their life thinks is in a crisis, but that usually leads to further crisis. I think a lot of people have probably taken in greater media about how that's affecting a lot of folks, especially Black and brown folks, but certainly in Northampton, it's an issue too. And so that's my one like narrow perspective on the police that I have personal experience of. Hold on one second. Sorry, I'm sharing a kitchen with my roommate. But basically what I want to get at is that there are people that already have some of the wisdom to do work outside of the police. So we run a peer respite, we run support both in psych hospitals and supporting people coming out of that. I've been part of alternatives to suicide groups for 8 years, where people can talk about these big feelings without the threat of force or coercion, or further institutional trauma. So there's a lot of wisdom in this area that I don't think is being tapped into, not just from me and our group, but there's a lot of folks, you know, like Jose and Ashwin, like talked about some of their own work. And I think we have a lot of people in this area that we could really like try some creative alternatives. When I said that we're peer-led, it also means that we're aspiring not to take power over other people, and that can happen even in moments where there's like big emotions and crisis involved. I think police often come and escalate shit. They come to a situation armed, often not knowing, how to interact with people. And it leads to further trauma in our community. So I would really love this commission, if you have the power to do so, to think about some creative ways. And I don't know the protocol here. Like, I would love to talk to y'all more outside of this forum and connect you to other people that have more experience of wellness checks. It feels like kind of hard to know where the right places to go to have these conversations are, because I feel like there are some people here, but not everybody, like Jose mentioned, that are either locked in hospitals or in jails, or like on the streets, who don't have this technology. They can't get here as easily. So I'm just aware of that, like who's not here too. So I'm trying to be a voice for some of the folks that can't be here, or who just feel afraid to like speak up. So yeah.
If you could reach out, send an email to myself and Dana, just with some information, we can set up a time and at least find a way to get some of that information from folks.
Are your emails listed here or in the...
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's on the website. I think. Sorry. So I believe that is the last person that had their hand up. Does anyone else have? Right, we have someone. So Yao Peng, I'm gonna unmute you here.
Oh, hi. I'm largely just saying that I agree with everything that Sean and Ashwin and Jose said. But also, I think some of us were able to go to the alternative subcommittee a couple weeks ago. And I think we might have sent along the same resources that we sent to the alternative subcommittee, but I just wanted to reiterate now with the whole commission that there were a number of people that showed up to that alternative subcommittee, including some local social workers who were speaking to the importance of if the commission is suggesting crisis response programs, that the commission strongly push Northampton to move completely away from anything that works with police officers, like the co-responder programs, and that the commission also makes a strong recommendation that it not be a crisis response program that uses social workers or sort of mainstream social service organizations like CSO and ServiceNet, because of the ways that those organizations often police people in different ways than the police. And that peer-led should really be like the gold standard for what Northampton can do. And I think I emailed, there was a webinar that was put on November 16th called Rights-Based Alternatives to Police Response for Mental Health Crises, a Worldwide Perspective. I've checked and it's still not up on the NARPA website, which was the organization that hosted it, but it says that it will be posting the recording soon. And I just wanted to strongly recommend this webinar. It was excellent. And actually one of the speakers in the webinar referred to the RLC as being like one of the best organizations that does peer-led work around the country. So yeah, just wanted to highlight that particular webinar and the RLC and sort of peer-led as being just way better than non-peer-led crisis response. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. And then Noah.
Hello, my name is Noah. This is my first time attending any meeting like this. I was born and raised in the Pioneer Valley and moved away and just returned after about a decade doing youth development and after-school programming in San Francisco. I'm now attending UMass again, finished my degree, and want to get involved in Northampton politics. I'm a resident of East Hampton, but I just wanted to chime in and say I really do support everything that people have brought up so far tonight. And I think Northampton really could be a torchbearer in sort of a new way of doing things. And I think that you could have a lot of influence on a lot of the surrounding towns. And one thing that I feel like is of notice to me is I was researching just sort of salaries for government officials in Northampton, and if you look at the fiscal year for 2020, half, like the top 50 earners, half of them are police officers. And to me, that just seems imbalanced. It's not a war zone in Northampton, and there's so many other industries and educational opportunities and you know what I mean, professors and so much schooling and other industries here that it doesn't make sense to me that, you know, the people making six figures from the government, half of them are police. That just seems like something that could certainly be adjusted. And like I said, I agree with everything everyone's brought up so far. And I think there is certainly money to support these community-led initiatives and peer resource within the community. And that's much more important than keeping funding into this institution that clearly does not work any longer. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So looking through, do we have anyone else that would like to make a public comment before we move on? I'm not seeing any. Just looking here, I think at this point in time, we can jump on to the next order of business, which is the report back from the subcommittees. Oh, yeah.
There's someone who says, I hope it's okay to provide comment in the chat. Currently, I do not have a working microphone. Just so you are aware.
Oh, thank you. I didn't have the chat open, so that's good. Yeah, I mean, typically that'd be better as an email to the commission rather than the chat, just so that it doesn't disappear at the end of this meeting. If you're comfortable doing that, Rye, that would be a little bit better. Okay, so I'm looking, just in short, I strongly support the residents that have spoken so far and hope to provide greater comment with working tech later. So, all right. That seems pretty, it seems to cover it. Again, if you do email, we can pass that along to all the commission members and it'll become part of the public record along with this recording. So with that, we will move over to the report back from the subcommittees. I guess we'll just start alphabetically. Can someone speak for the alternatives to policing subcommittee?
So please feel, I'll ask the other members of the subcommittee to comment on what I'm about to say. As you've actually heard, we actually have had really exciting discussions in our public comment sections, and we've gotten a trove of information from people who've been working with us. Our newest member, Carol Owen, has also brought us a lot of insight and interest. And I also want to call out Nick Fleischer, who attended our last meeting and gave us some very important information about the work ServiceNet has been doing in terms of meeting mental health needs. In our next meeting, our plan is to discuss housing issues and how those are impacting the need for policing services and mental health services. We continue to talk about, are there alternatives to how we do mental health reaction? And as you've heard from some of the public comment, I'm going to use Alex's word now, spectrum of choices that's everywhere from the police or who get called when a mental health emergency occurs, to a partnership model, to models where there's a triage to mental health workers who might respond, to what you're beginning to hear about this evening, peer-led, community-based groups that leave out the police altogether, to peer-based, community-based programs that leave out classical social workers and psychologists and only use community-based peer support leaders. So there's a real spectrum of possibilities. And you can go from, there's a lot of police involvement to there is zero police involvement. And even when you go to zero police involvement, there are also choices that also remove, I'm looking for a diplomatic term to use, classically trained mental health providers. This is hard for me to say because I'm a doctor, and a lot of my training is in a classically based system. Though I recognize the problems that go along with that, and Carol has actually been leading us in a lot of discussions about that. So we're figuring that for the public comment session, we want to sort of demonstrate that spectrum of possibility. What we haven't moved on to yet, and we want to talk about again at our next meeting, is likely going to be about housing issues. We also want to talk more about the response to domestic violence issues. And Carol has brought a very important issue about how do we get the voices of people who require these services into our discussion space. I'm going to stop there, and if other members of the Alternative Commission want to add or change or edit what I've just said, that's fine.
Alex, and then Candace, or Carol, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Booker, I think you covered it very well. I would just add about substance abuse. That's another area that we'll be looking at in future meetings.
And Carol?
So yeah, thanks for the overview. When we have parsed out the different areas that we're going to investigate and bring back to this larger group, housing, substance abuse responses, community responses, when there's crisis, when there's upset on the street. I don't want to, a lot of it is not criminal activity. It points to me to the need for coordinated social services, so that when we talk about housing needs, employment needs, needs for treatment of, or at least offering treatment for substance abuse and dependency and mental health, I see it as a big Venn diagram that's very overlapping. And the other circle that I put in there is history of trauma, early life or current life trauma. And so I view the most vulnerable populations that we need to consider and center here, and people are speaking to that tonight and previously, the need for us, no matter what we come up with as this sort of this commission with our recommendations, that we need to always center in our minds as we review all the various models that are out there, that the most vulnerable population in this town and many towns can't be segmented into who's a substance abuser, who has some mental health issues, who's labeled with mental health issues, et cetera. I do think we will continue to look at the whole spectrum, Booker, that you laid out. And there are certainly people we'll be talking to, in addition to looking at the articles, to come up with some recommendations. But I have to say, in closing, I've been I find it very, very compelling to hear from people in the community who are reminding us of the need to center the most vulnerable populations, the most exposed to policing on the street and potential arrest when, or getting funneled into either a hospital setting with a locked ward or other locked and controlled environments. And I feel like we really need to look very hard at alternatives to that. And for one, I'm interested in continuing to have conversations with people who have worked in peer-led programs in the past. So that's it.
All right, thank you. And then Javier?
Yeah, I would like to add two things, taking what the last point that Carol made. We're going to be looking into having peer-led people that are working for peer-led organizations across the nation to come to talk to the subcommittee. Hopefully, this break is going to give us enough time to be able to engage a couple of people. I would love to hear from Sean, that was part of the public speaking part of the meeting. The other thing that I would like to restate is that at least in our subcommittee, what you heard during the public speaking portion, the public comment portion, it's extremely reflective, I would say, to what we are listening every single subcommittee meeting coming from the community. I would say we're talking about trying to avoid correspondent system, to move to a peer-led as a gold standard for Northampton, turning our sort of tuning our ears into this consciousness. And this is something that we have talked a lot in the subcommittee, that we should be conscious that a lot of our bias are coming from privilege, and I think that has been a really good starting point from our subcommittee, because so far the flow of ideas has been extremely illuminating, and I think we're heading in the right direction.
All right, awesome. So that sounds really good. Alex and then Booker. So those two hands fly up.
I just wanted to add another note, and I think Booker spoke to this during our last alternatives meeting, which was that the peer-led, we haven't been able to find a lot of data and research about the effectiveness of peer-led programs, which is not, I mean, not to say that we will necessarily recommend them any less, but the question is kind of, the more we can get to show that there's good experience, and that then the more we can push that recommendation, and the more likely that the mayor and the city council are to listen to that. So the will it just be something where we recommend a pilot program, or will it be something where we can recommend more? So that's kind of we're looking for more of that. Thanks.
All right, and Booker.
Thank you for saying that, Alex. That's actually true. And actually, some of the information we received recently, actually, even they say we don't have enough data to sort of talk about what's working well and what isn't. I actually want to ask Javier to talk about something else, which I think the whole larger commission needs to hear, which is we are going to be trying to reach some representatives of some of the peer and community-led organizations that we're learning about nationally, but whether we can offer them honoraria to talk with us. And I'd really like to ask Javier to comment more about this, because this might be a generic issue for the larger commission.
Yeah, and thanks for reminding me that, because that was sort of a third point that I was going to make, and I totally forgot. I understand that among, in the kind of system that we navigate, a lot of people would say, well, I'm giving these pro bono talks and I'm just going and talking. From the get-go, my position has been people should be partially compensated or compensated for what they bring to the table. Bringing people who have been running programs that are positively affecting the community in other part of the nation they would be able to bring here testimony, data, and information that would help to guide the conversation of this commission. Based on that, and based on many times that I feel the brown person having to educate white people in my working environment, I strongly feel that we should talk about the possibility of an honorarium for people who are coming here to educate the commission in matters related to their own professional development of peer-led or other approaches to in where communities are trying to diminish the presence of the police in our community.
Okay, yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. That was something that was on my to-do list to check in with the mayor about, and then I also forgot about it. So I've got that now. It's on my list, so I will do that right after this meeting.
Thanks, Dan.
All right. Are there any other comments about the alternatives and how things are going? All right. So I guess I'll open. Nick.
I think that in looking for reaching out to the peer community, people who have received services or whose lived experience has involved them with the system, that we should try to get a range and look at what are the various places where we might reach out to get comment, public comment or personal comment from people specific to the services they've received. I think the RLC could be very helpful. There's a program in Northampton called the Starlight Center that serves people with serious mental health challenges. And there are other organizations as well. So it's just a suggestion. Let me know if I can be helpful.
Okay. And then Lois. Nope. Lois, I don't think your mic is working. Nope. That's better.
I'm just thinking about all of these different ideas, RLC, domestic violence, this continuum of responses that people are talking about. And I'm wondering if if we have a hearing, a next hearing, that hearing, we could invite people to speak at that hearing, not for 3 minutes, but for some amount of time that's longer than 3 minutes, and have after each person speaks, have a question and answer, or have some kind of discussion, so that and that we could publicize it to the Northampton community that this is happening, like we're hopefully going to publicize this next hearing or first hearing. And so people can, so it's not segmented into the alternatives committee, because I think this is a huge part of what we're doing, is educating ourselves and educating the public. And this might be an opportunity at the second hearing to have time like that. We can think about, people can suggest people, and we can invite them, and we can give them whatever, I don't know how much time, depending on how much all that stuff, whatever that is. And so that's my suggestion, because I think a lot of us can't come to every one of these, both commission meetings and also committee meetings. And so I have this feeling that, things are happening that are important, and, I don't know what they are, but I feel like I'm missing something, and I don't want to be missing it. And so this might be a way to do that. The one thing I do have a comment about Javier's statement about paying people. I think if people are coming for their, as part of their jobs, like they're already getting paid. And so I don't think we have to pay them extra, especially since in the age of Zoom, people aren't like leaving their house and getting on an airplane and spending a day and spending another day. They're coming for whatever the amount of time is. And I think that's part of, me, that's part of what people get paid for in their jobs. And so, I mean, this is a whole other issue, which I don't know if we want to talk about right now anyway, but I just feel like I have to respond to that. And I mean, for people that, you know, don't have, not their job, but their volunteers or peers or all of those things, that to me is a different thing entirely. Anyway, so that's my response to this. It's interesting. It would be great to have a bigger public presentation and conversation about it.
All right, thank you. And Javier?
Yeah, a couple of things. The first one is, I think it's a good idea to invite people with expertise to the big public hearings, even though I would advise caution because we know the numbers that show up to give testimony during the debate of the police budget. So if hopefully people listening are bringing that amount, we're gonna be there for a fair amount of hours each time. So I wouldn't be really sure if we're gonna be able to have an expert talking there. Also, and I think that raised a different thing that in the same way how Nick was able to come to our subcommittee, and I'm in fault on this. I haven't gone to any other committee. I tried to watch those on video. I would invite the other commissioners to either attend other committees. Hopefully everybody's getting the agenda from the other subcommittees. So if our subcommittee is having somebody coming to talk to us, you're going to be aware of that. You can come, and certainly you can be part of the conversation, and you can also ask questions. And the reason why I'm saying this is that because we have the first draft so close that waiting for the hearings to be able to have the experts to be able to move the conversation forward and to be able to start writing and developing a main line of the main idea of where we want to go. I think that's going to push us to wait too much to start working. The other, it's that if you're not somebody from the comms department or the PR department from one of these organizations, you should be paid. If you're coming to talk to us, if you're not a spokesperson but just somebody who works in that organization, as you know, as somebody who's doing the peer-led work, or as somebody who is a director, that people has to be paid. People who work in comms or PR, if those organizations have it and they have to talk and promote their work, okay, that people get paid for that. But somebody who is on the ground doing the work, that kind of person is not being paid to come to talk to us and to come to educate us.
All right, thank you. Booker and then Lois.
So I was going to say that I agree with Javier about what he said. I think if you called me to come and talk to you about vaccine research at your group, you don't need to pay me. That's what I'm paid for at Bay State. However, most of especially when you drop down to truly peer-led, restorative justice type programs, they are websites and nobody's got a grant. Nobody has got a big thing with the city. And their websites are more about, and by the way, send us money. But they're doing these marvelous things sort of on a volunteer basis. And, you know, this is why I think we need this input. which it makes it phenomenal. And if I had the needs that their clients have, I would want them to take care of me and not the rest of the system. However, they're clearly not financially in a good place. So I think we're going to have to be, by the way, that makes it difficult to think about how would we put this in place in Northampton. What are the standards? What are the regulations? What's the quality assurance? All of that kind of thing. But many of the organizations I looked at that Yaping sent to us, and I reviewed carefully, they are doing work, but they are doing it based on the kindness of others rather than sort of an official government contract. So those people, I think if we were going to call them, I think Javier is right, we need to think about honoraria. I think if we're calling larger organizations that have government contracts and other things, that might be a different issue. So I would like to think about this and have some rules about it, but I think there are some different things going on.
All right, and then Lois.
I just want to clarify, I'm not saying that people who aren't getting paid to do this work shouldn't get paid to come and do it. That's not at all what I meant. In terms of the hearing, in my mind, this would be a hearing after the December 17th date. It wouldn't be structured to inform whatever people are writing in advance of that date. It would be afterwards, and it would be, it would be public, not just a committee meeting. People would be invited to speak for a given time, and then there would be questions and answers, discussion, and then, or part of it would be, could be a public comment period, but the public comment period would not be, at least in my mind, I mean, who knows, it would not be the bulk of it. The bulk of it would be, we would bring people, we would ask people to come, just like any other hearing. People have been to hearings, State House, that kind of hearing is what I imagine. People would be invited to speak. There would be a chance for commissioners to ask them questions or have discussion, and there would also be a public comment period, and it would be after the 17th deadline. We wouldn't be trying to jam this in between now and then. Thought.
All right, Carol?
Thanks. I just wanted to jump into the middle of two of the issues that have just come up. One is how to access data that, we maybe the study of, in particular, outcome studies being available for peer-led initiatives may be sparse, meaning they're not big quantitative studies, but the data, I'm sure some data is there, and it may be qualitative. It may be the commentary of users of the services, people who have been in peer respite programs who have testimony about what their experience was, as opposed to their previous times of being picked up on the street when they were in distress and, by the police. There are numbers of models present. We don't have to go to the West Coast for this. There are numbers of models that we could draw from that would represent not only peer-led experiences. Right here in the Valley, the Western Mass Recovery Learning Center has been around since 2007. As far as I know, the peer respite program came up in maybe 2015. So contacting the people who work in those organizations makes sense to me, and paying, as has been said and debated and discussed here in the last couple of minutes, it becomes, we could set a principle of trying to provide an honorarium to people who are strictly volunteers in these programs, as opposed to staff or professionals. There's also, if you want to look at other models, you want to look at a co-responder model and years of experience with that. There's the BEST program there's CSO, there's BEST program in Boston. They've already published some of their data. That's a different model that does involve a police officer coupled with usually a social worker or a mental health worker. So I think that we can, I feel like we need to be efficient with our use of time and how we're reaching out to get data in so that we can write our recommendations. But I think we can look locally. And, Nick has spoken at our meeting briefly about looking at, what CSO's, experience has been. And so I think we can draw on some of these models and get both organizational people who have been program developers of the programs and users of the services by going through the programs, finding anyone who's been using the service, who's willing to testify at a public hearing where we target some prompt questions that we're hoping to hear from people who really have the experience. So I guess that's it. Stay closer. We can stay closer to home if that's useful, and we can devise some kind of arrangement where we compensate some people who testify and expect other people based on their passion for their model and what it's done from their perspective to show up just on their own salary or their own passion. So that's it.
All right. Does anyone have any other? Oh, Nick?
This is a process comment. Javier raised the question of whether a speaker could just come to the subcommittee, and Lois was recommending that it'd be good if a speaker came to the entire to a public hearing. I personally, I'm just speaking for myself, I am fine. I'd like to keep the process moving as smoothly and as easily as possible. I am fine with speakers coming to subcommittees and making sure everybody is aware of it so that we can all attend it if needed. But I do think we have two kind of competing models. And I just want to say I'm comfortable with the idea of subcommittees moving ahead with their work, and any of us can join it. I do believe the alternatives subcommittee has the most expansive mandate, and so I think your work already is drawing the rest of us in some ways. So I just want to suggest that we do whatever helps things move along quickly.
And Javier?
Hold on, I space out. Yeah, I mean, and this is for this is an open question for the other subcommittees when they are reporting. Is there any other subcommittee that has talked about having people to talk to them in relationship to their work and what they are doing, sort of an informative way? And I would like to know if we are the only subcommittee that are sort of, talking about that, or if there's other subcommittees that are also doing the same or not.
Nick?
This briefly came up before, but our subcommittee did raise the question of actually having the police come at some point, inviting the chief or somebody who she assigns. But that's an issue that did come up, not as a recommendation, but as a question and something that we felt should be discussed.
All right. So I can say for the budget and spending subcommittee, we haven't gotten there yet. We're still sort of, I'm gonna say, piled high in numbers and spreadsheets and trying to figure out and make sense of some of those things. But you know, the way that it's looking, it might require some clarification from someone in the city as well, to have them speak about how funding is done, how hiring is done, all of those sort of things. And it could be specific to the police department or broader. So there might be bringing in someone from the from that. I will say broadly, we have received information from people around about other programs that they're interested in, or that they've been researching that have had pretty good outcomes or might be good models, including some folks from Minneapolis and from Denver, who just launched or are in the process of launching new programs, and some of the outcomes there. So we have those options as well. So thinking about larger and broader. I did attend a talk earlier in the summer, or a chat with the folks from Adastra, which is Denver based, which, you know, you can reach out to them as well if we're interested. I think it would be good to bring in people who have experience in implementing these things, both to ask about what their program is, what their inspiration was, what their process was, but also asking what the outcomes were, and beyond that, what the reaction from the city was, how they navigated all of these things, and implementation, because I think that's something that we also have to think about, which is probably the least fun part, but that we still have to figure out how this balances and how this works. So yeah, that's a long way of saying we don't have anyone yet, but we probably at some point. Lois?
Well, if the way, I mean, I'm fine with doing whatever people want to do about the, you know, bigger commission or the committees. If we do just the committees and it is, let's say, the alternatives committee, I hope that when people are invited to speak, that there'll be some kind of public notice of it, not just sending around an email to people on the commission, so that people who want to know about it and know who's being invited and can participate. I have heard from a number of people that they can't figure out where anything is, and, you know, or what's happening. And I think that's, I mean, it's a communication issue right now. And maybe there's a way to issue a news release or something that says, you know, this is what the commission's doing now, and in the next 2 weeks, these are going to be the people that are invited, or this is when the meetings are, and you can find them this way. And so it would be more open, or people would know about it more. And especially if there are people being invited to speak about whatever, the Denver program or the RLC or whoever it is that's being invited to speak. I think it's important for people to know that it's happening. So it's not a surprise at the end. You know, the more people know, the less surprised people will be at the end.
So to that, what we did for the for the upcoming public hearing, the city put out notices on its social media and did a media release for us as well. So we can ask them to do that again. I would also say collectively, if there are other avenues that folks think would be good to distribute in, you know, if you let Dana and myself know, we can coordinate that, or and Noah as well. Together, the power that we have, we'll get it out to where it needs to go, as well, to let people know both what we're looking at and who's coming and what they'll be talking about, and to define those meetings as well, to say that it'll be mostly presentation with question and answer afterwards. All right. we've hung on this for a little bit. Are there any other comments or questions, statements for the subcommittee on alternatives to policing? All right. So in that case, we'll move on. I guess I'll do a quick recap for the spending, the budgets and spending subcommittee, and Lois or Josie, where I forget things, because I know I will, please, please come in and correct me. One of the things that we finally got access to were some of the budgets and spending, including overtime and detailing, or details for the police. And some of that we've looked at, and really general comment is that it looks like the city makes roughly $1 million a year or so from police detail work. Meaning that the officers go out, they do that detail work, they get paid. The city takes about 40% of that, and it comes back, and it gets just put into the general fund, and it's not allocated to anything. And one of the things that, and then it becomes sort of free for all. And one of the things that we were thinking right off the bat is, if we're looking at developing pilot programs and things like that, or funding a new department or something like that, there's $1 million as sort of seed money. That's pretty consistent across the board if we're going to continue to have police detail, to look at that as a place to start reinvesting in community services. And so we're talking about, you know, different organizations being really resource strapped. Well, maybe there's a way that the city can either offer grant money or a process to fund those services, so that they are robust and they're not just struggling for money. Another thing that we looked at was just the overtime that the police department is paying. Usually at least $250,000, sometimes up to a little over $300,000 in overtime, depending on the year. Which seems pretty extreme. And so really trying to figure out what that is. And we're also looking at details and overtime hours in addition to salary, and doing some of the relational analyses, because some folks are making a considerable amount, sometimes half or more, sometimes double their salary by doing these details and overtime. But, and Michael's not here, he did a lot of the work looking at sort of the averages. But there were some people that were, you know, spending upwards of almost 6,000 hours a year working, which is well over a 40-hour work week. They're spending all of this time, and you know, the question sort of comes up, and this is maybe something we want to check in. What happens if a person is not, you know, resting, and they're just constantly sort of on duty and acting? What happens to their judgment? What happens to all of these things? And are there limits? Are there ways that we could both, we're looking at this sort of saying like, well, is there a way to limit some of that activity? Both from the sort of like the idea that these are folks who are making almost now 3 times the median income of Northampton with these, so that there's a sort of moral part of that, like maybe we want to cut down on that spending, but also asking the question of what is safe, like how much working is safe working, to make sure that everyone is okay while they're doing that. The other things that we've started looking at, and I can say this, there were some, we do have, I started looking at the budget. I've got 2015 done, just sort of looking at the pay information. There are some discrepancies that we will have to ask questions about. There are some people who are getting overtime pay, but they are not listed in the budget as a person hired by the police, and they have no salary information. The same thing with, so there's some people getting overtime that also don't have any information there. Or detail work. So I need to figure out what's going on in that, if the information that we have just isn't accurate or what's happening. But trying to reconcile that and get it into something that makes sense, so we can look at both pay, that both the part of the budget that's going towards personnel and pay, and also the rest of it, so that we can start to work out also what some of these activities or what the activities of the police cost or do. Lois has brought this up, and I will find a way to make this math work. But really saying, you know, if we have a lot of the city's time is spent on building checks or other non-emergencies, how much is having a police officer check a building costing the city? How much is having traffic enforcement? How much does that cost the city? These are the things that are fairly low level and that have been outsourced to other departments, but also to look at the things that have been sort of taken on by the police because no one else has funds for it. So how much money is sort of available for mental health care, right? So if we're saying the police are doing these wellness checks, if they're responding to people in crises, you know, how do we know what funds we can shift pretty easily or effectively over to another service? Again, thinking about how do you fund all these alternatives to police. It's not going to be easy to do that, and I don't think there's a perfect metric because, at least from what it seems like, the logs don't have how much time an officer spent doing something. It's just how much they've. It's just that sort of point of contact. So, looking at those. But yeah, that's where we are now. We also do have, we just got information about grants from the police department, so it'll be looking through that as well. But that's where we are right now. And then Lois and Josie, please add more.
Yes, this is where we are. I mean, one of the things that Dan mentioned that I'm interested in, it's something that we'll have to coordinate with the services committee, is the percent, you know, what the biggest percentage of time that police do. Is the biggest percentage of time, and then sort of trying to somehow correlate that to an amount of money. Is the majority, it's a huge chunk of it, property, private property checks? Is it suspicious persons? Is it wellness checks? Things that are not even necessarily a policing or could not be a policing function. And to try to have a ranking of these police activities by most to least, and then trying to correlate that with a dollar amount to see what actually the city is spending its money on. So that's one thing that I'm interested in, hopefully, between what we're doing and what the services committee is doing. Hopefully those two things can come together to have one set of like a graph. The other thing that I looked at a little bit was the purchasing of police cars, and every year that I looked at, which was 2015 to 2020, or 2016 to 2020, 5 police cars were purchased at like around $300,000 or something like that. And additionally, on average, about $80,000 a year is spent on gas, and another 30 or 40,000 on maintenance. So that's like a big chunk of money. And it just raises the question about, you know, how much is needed, especially if what a lot of these police cars are doing is going around doing private property checks. So, I mean, to look at not just the purchase of the cars and maintenance of the cars and how many of them there are, but how are they being used? And is it necessary to have so many of these based on these other services that the police are providing. So we don't have answers to that, but these are some of the things that we've been talking about, and hopefully at some point we'll come up with some answers based on what other committees are doing.
All right. So Josie, unless you have anything to throw in there, I think that covers it for us. I know that I'm sure I'm forgetting something. David?
Just a comment, Dan. I don't want you to spend that $1 million too fast that you're getting from the police details, because I think that, we're going to run into a conflict here. I'm being facetious, obviously, but one of the things that I am trying to urge our committee to deal with is sort of to look for the low-hanging fruit as to where we can reduce the footprint of police. I know that a lot of this has been characterized in terms of defunding police, in terms of taking money away from the police. This is kind of a complicated issue because I think as you're presenting it, it's actually bringing money into the city's general fund as opposed to the police. Nonetheless, my focus is a lot less on cost. I'm not so much worried about what things cost. I'm worried about the footprint of the police. And to me, one of the areas that I refer to as low-hanging fruit is these police details. Why do you have to be a police officer to direct traffic? Those could be good jobs for non-police officers. So I just bring that to your attention, and I think it's sort of a good tension that may develop between some of our committees here.
Absolutely. I mean, I didn't mean to present this as the only, sorry, I didn't mean to present this as sort of the only thing. We also, that sort of came up with what happens if we get rid of of these practices, but it's sort of understanding what all of the options are that we have, and so sort of being prepared to give multiple opportunities to say, all right, if we're not getting rid of police detailing, all right, here's money that we could say should be redirected directly into the community for specific purposes outside of policing, and to prevent or to lower crime or experiences with the police and interactions with them. If we do get rid of that entirely and the city's not coming in, we're also looking at some of the other things. So like how much money the city makes from things like civil asset forfeiture, ticketing, and all of those things, and understanding that could be loss of revenue or changes of revenue, changing of the revenue stream depending on how it's being collected, or if it's not being collected at all, right? So if we move away from the sort of ticketing as a process for traffic enforcement, saying like, well, it tends to be for different types of infractions, right? Because it tends to affect the people with the lowest income the most, and it almost acts as another tax. Some places have used it to fund like huge swaths of the city. So looking at sort of what we have in this place and how we navigate that. So thank you for bringing it up. It should have been explicit with that. Booker.
David, I'm really glad you brought up some of those issues. There was actually someone just sent us a bunch of mailings today where the city of Berkeley is about to set up traffic policing will be done outside of the police department as a shift about this kind of stuff, and sort of as a way to deal with the fact that the ratios of who gets stopped since to partially be determined by race. I'm curious though, with the other issues that you're bringing up in terms of looking at the budget, I think it's going to be hard for you to understand what's going on unless you actually talk to somebody from the police. And I guess that's why I'm curious where you are with thinking about doing that.
Lois?
We haven't actually had a discussion about talking to someone at the police. I mean, it could be someone in the city finance department rather than somebody at the police. So somebody that actually, somebody on that end rather than the police end. So, but I mean, we just haven't gotten that far. We requested all of this information. It's available to people, and we just started getting it really, and some that we haven't gotten yet. So we haven't even formulated all the questions that are generated from what we've got or what we haven't gotten.
Yeah, and I think that sort of sums up we don't even know what the questions are that we need to ask. Is this is this going to be specifically revenue based, or is it going to bleed into actions and activities? Is it going to go into personnel management and human resources and all of those things? So it's still sort of digging into some of these things. We have rather than like spreadsheets, we have like scans of spreadsheets. So to do any of the sort of math and put together things, it's like by hand going through some of these to put them in and being as careful as I can to make sure I'm not making mistakes. I don't want to add a decimal point where it doesn't belong. But I mean, even yesterday yesterday we just got some more information back from the request, so that's more to take through too. So we're getting there as fast as we can, but it is a lot of data to parse through to make sense. Namdi and then Cynthia.
Yeah, it occurs to me now, the question has come up a couple times about bringing in representatives of police into our process. And as a newbie to this kind of thing, as someone who's not done this kind of city council process, my naive view is that if we are making decisions that might impact police officers, it would be very strange to me to not have the representatives of the group that could be affected as part of this. We've got an open public forum where anybody can show up, and presumably police officers could be listening to this now or could be part of the public discussion. But the people who do speak at the public forum, generally have not identified themselves as such. They've identified themselves as opposed to more policing. So it strikes me that at some point in this process, it would be good to explicitly plan to hear the perspective of police and invite it in. And yet when that comes up, there's been a lot of trepidation. At least I've had the sense that there's trepidation in the group, that almost the assumption is that we would only bring police in if there was only a very compelling reason, or we should be really careful or cautious about it. So I guess at some point I'd love to hear the perspectives of others who've had experience with something like this, or just based on their own views about under what circumstances would it be wise to, and when would you invite police officers to be part of this process, and why wouldn't you? I don't know that we've been explicit about it. I think it would be good for us to be explicit about kind of what are those pluses and minuses. Because on the face of it, to me, it seems like you would definitely want to have every constituency affected by this weighing in. So that's my 2 cents.
All right, I'm gonna go Javier, and then I'll throw myself in the queue as well. Oh, sorry, Cynthia first, then Javier, then myself.
I think that issue, Namdi, is on our agenda for today's meeting, if I'm correct. Is that the issue of whether or not we should invite the police department to come to our meetings? Yeah. Can I just confirm that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So we are going to talk about it. So I just wanted to just get in my one little question here. Dan, when you brought up detail work, I think I wrote down wellness checks, property checks, traffic. Is there a lot more?
So we don't have the information about what the details were. We just have the pay and the rate. So officers receiving, so we're looking, we have like the information, so how much they receive for their salary from the budget for the year, and then also whether they received overtime pay if it was flat rate, so their regular pay rate versus time and a half, double time, and then detail work, which is always set by the union and the city at $51 an hour, and the city takes 40% of that. But we don't have the specific lists by pay of what the detail work was. That is something that we did ask. I should check on the status of that, just to know what all of the details were.
I think when David talks about low-hanging fruit, that's one of them, to identify what all the details are. So that's great. I mean, I think our committee, policies and procedures, can really benefit from that information as well. So, but I look forward to the discussion. Thanks, Namdi, for reminding us about visitors from the department. Thank you.
All right, Javier.
I just want to state a reminder. We brought this issue early on in the meetings. We talk about this, bringing police officers or somebody from the police department to talk about that. I particularly talk about, I want to hear their narrative about how they put the money, why they put the money, why they do this and not they do that. I mean, that was early on in our early meetings. I'm glad that we're doing it right now and that it's in today's agenda, but I just want to flag that that was brought to the table of the commission early on.
Okay. Oh, sorry, I lost my train of thought. I know there was something else that I wanted to respond to before bringing police, but I've lost that train. So at this point, I think we should probably move on. Unless anyone has any other comments, we'll jump to the policies and services.
Hi there. I'll try to give you a fairly quick summary of where our subcommittee, the progress of our subcommittee. Namdi, Elizabeth, David, Cynthia, and myself are on the policies and services subcommittee. We tried to focus on 5 or 6 specific areas because we didn't want to get too far afield. We felt that focusing was important. But before we got to those specific areas, we looked at a few things that just to frame what we were looking at. David pointed out that the idea of reducing the footprint of the police is kind of a general goal with a whole spectrum of ways to do that. But in looking at policies and services, we're looking at an existing police department. We're not looking at another model. And in so doing, we wanted to look at what kinds of things we thought the police department might look at differently or do differently or think about differently. First of all is the question of what do they do and how do we know what they do? And they do have an initiative, an open data portal on their website, and they have a commitment to transparency, and yet we don't fully understand exactly how that's working. But there is a citizen review committee for the open data portal, and I think it's important that people be aware of the open data portal and take a look at it because it does have some very interesting information. That said, the goal of understanding some aspects of what they do is a priority for our subcommittee. So let me just talk about the areas that we are investigating, and we're in the process of formulating questions to present to get more information from the police department. One is how they process complaints. They do have a detailed complaint procedure, but we don't really know what happens to complaints. There's no information on the complaints themselves. So we will be asking about the complaint process, what the complaints were over a period of time, how they were submitted, and then who reviewed them and what were the resolutions. The second area we're looking at is training and education, and what are they doing in the areas of training and education that would expand how they manage issues of social justice, diversity, community interaction, and mental health. We know a little bit about it, but I think that it's not clear what their training and education goals are and how far they've achieved them. So we want information about that. Third area is strategic planning. We feel that any organization, especially the size of our police department, that is trying to serve the community should have planning goals. What are they trying to achieve aside from reducing crime? I mean, clearly that's going to be on the list. But what are their strategic planning goals that would address some of the would address community concerns about issues of social justice, issues of trauma, issues of interacting with mental health, things like that. We want to know what's their higher level intention and how do they implement it. And then the last couple more things. How are they approaching mental health issues? They do have some excellent policies on paper, but we don't know how extensive the training is and how many officers and how they continue to be trained, and also what their algorithms are. How do they identify a mental health problem? Things like that. And then the last thing that we want to ask about is how they break down their activities, the percentage, how they break their time and activities down by percentage. It's just what Lois was referring to a few minutes ago. How much time do they do the various activities that they do, and how do they allocate their time and resources? That's where we want to start off with. Then we will know much more about what we want to ask. I think transparency is our goal, and we feel that there should be some way that the public is able to interact with these issues, much as they have with the open data portal, where they do have a citizen committee that gives input to the open data portal. And I think that that's a model for expanding on that. I'll stop there, ask my subcommittee if you want to add anything.
So I'm gonna, I guess Javier had their hand up, and then Namdi.
Yeah, I really appreciate the subcommittee, the work that you guys are doing. With that being said, I want to just flag anti-violence training, social justice education. We know, and it's extremely vastly documented, that has zero impact in how police interacts and reacts to racial justice and racial incidents. It's vastly documented. And I want to just mention that, and also, you know, going back to having police department coming here, you know, sometimes I get this conflict with myself about, do I need to talk to the police to try to figure out that I want to change it as a person, as a brown person, as an immigrant? I don't need that, because I know that they need to be changed. with that being said, I understand for people and for the sake of the process that we want them to come to talk about the process. But also, we can see it from a different point of view. I mean, I don't see people working against climate change, developing a strategy, and they say, you know what? Let's call ExxonMobil to the table because they have a huge stake in this matter. They don't do that, and I think in the same way how we see environmental justice as an important and relevant issue, racial justice should get the same deference and the same thoughtfulness when we're talking about changing the lives of people of color and things that are already documented that are not working, and the fact that police departments are historically racially as a white supremacist organization.
All right, thank you. So Nandi and then Lois, and then I'll jump in.
Just to supplement some of what Nick said, on the matter of complaints, for those who haven't had a chance to look at the website, they do a nice job of documenting a process. They describe how they handle complaints. And they also, as Nick said, provide us with a lot of data on sort of use of force and a variety of other things, but notably absent are data on the actual complaints that they get. So we don't know kind of, what complaints have come in, what they look like. And so this is part of what I think we're asking for is a representative sample of cases that we can consider and look at through our own perspective. And part of what we're struggling with is kind of, ideally you'd want to see every complaint that's ever come in ever. Obviously, we're going to have to make some decisions about, is that going to be a couple of years back? How do we do that so they're not selectively cherry picking complaints they want us to see? But one of the things that concerned me in this process is that they have these kind of three possible outcomes at the end of a complaint. One is that the complaint could be judged as the officer committed a crime. The officer could be found to have committed a violation of policy, which is not necessarily a crime. Or the third category is basically the complaint is not valid, essentially. And that third category to me is a vast wasteland of things that could be really quite hurtful in the community that I'd like to understand a lot more about. So I just wanted to amplify that's kind of what we're looking for in that category. I think other than that, on the matter of training, it probably is worth me offering a different opinion than Javier just pointed out. One is we always should be interested in what the evidence is that drastically shows that training never works. But even if we have that information, we don't want to skip the part where we find out whether these police departments are doing anything different than what we know doesn't work. It's important not to skip that logical step. You want to know what they're actually doing, and then you would then say, well, what they're doing we know has evidence does not work. Before we kind of go forward with that, which I think is why it's worth us getting that information. And even if the other question is, even if training is given, there's an important issue that Nick raised, which has to do with how do they document whether the training essentially is effective? Are they following up with the officers? Are they evaluating the officers to understand that the training actually is sticking? Do they have continuing education requirements where they have to continue to certify that they have, retained certain levels of competence? So there's lots of ways, I think, as an educator, I would say there's lots of ways to skin a cat, so to speak. And I'm not, willing to sort of argue that just because some training models are ineffective, that all training models are ineffective. That's kind of what we'd want to be able to look at. That's all I say. Thanks.
Great, thank you. So Lois, and then myself, and then Elizabeth.
I want to echo what Javier is saying about training, just because we know from police department to police department, ones that have trained constantly, that there actually are no different outcomes. And I'm not saying you shouldn't look at what the training is, but I mean, the police department, like any bureaucracy, has lots of written stuff and lots of procedures and lots of policies. And to me, the divide is not what the policies are, not all the procedures, which sound great, or the trainings, which people have to do, and then there's no follow-up, or we can't measure it. To me, the proof is in the pudding, and that is, what is it that the police are doing? And that's my main question always. What is it that they're doing? Not what they say they're doing, but, and those police logs, I mean, don't do it for me. I mean, or if they did, I mean, I would say that mostly what they're doing is private property. So that's one thing. The other thing, I just want to reiterate what Elizabeth said. I think at the last commission meeting when this came up about complaints, which is not everybody feels comfortable going into the police station and making a complaint. And so even whatever complaints they have or whatever complaints you find that they have probably doesn't really reflect what, I mean, there's no way to say, you know, what didn't happen because somebody hasn't walked in there and complained. But I just think that for that to be the, whatever you find out to be the record or the idea of what people's experience is with the police can be very far from what it actually is. And for most people, for so many people, there's fear, there's retaliation about making complaints. So it's just one thing which may or may not be reflective of what actually is happening, what policing is like.
Thank you, Lois. I'm gonna a little bit echo what Javier said, at least in the research that I've done, and I'm not in psychology and sociology, so a very vastly different type or academic field, but it looks like, at least from what I've seen, most of the training that police departments are looking at or get is really implicit bias training. And at least from what I've read, the efficacy of that is really only there when a person is open to the training rather than a mandatory training they have to attend. And not to say that all police officers are against that, but you know, unless they walk in there really excited and hoping to change and learn new strategies and ways to think, it's not really going to change things, and it still doesn't do anything largely about the other parts of the police recruitment process for individuals, which might affect the biases that they even walk in the door with. But one of the things that I was thinking of is, as you're sort of talking about what policies they have, I would say if we're looking at their policies, we should hold the police to the same standard that we're holding ourselves to, which is to look at what they do and then say how they can ask, how can you know that that is effective and that it's doing what you expect it to do? So, you know, we say, well, implicit bias training probably or might not work because there's some research that says it doesn't. But let's follow up with, how do we know, or how does the Northampton Police Department know that the training it's spending money on actually produces the outcomes it's looking for? And so just asking for a positive there, not trying to prove by a negative in there. But one of the things that also brings up, so this is in the beginning of this whole budgetary process that led to the commission formation. One of the things that we had, or one of the things that Chief Casper had brought up was that their process for identifying trainings was somebody finds a training, they go to it, and then they decide if it was good. And if it was good in their view, they tell the department about it, and then more people go. Which, let's be honest, that is not the best process if we're identifying what's good training or what's giving us outcomes, especially if we're talking about educator experiences, right? Satisfaction in a course versus the actual learning that happens in a course is not always the same. And so thinking about, you know, if we're looking at these policies, trying to define or trying to understand what policies came about because of meaningful, thoughtful processes and what came about just because it was something someone got a grant for at first, or that it felt good, or that it just became sort of the thing that they do out of history and tradition, and keeping those things separate when we're looking at that. and so just holding them to the same standard that we're holding ourselves to in that. And so I'll throw that out there. I also think that it would be good for the subcommittees, if you're forming questions, if they can be, I mean, one of the things we could look at are the internal affairs for the police, as well as these things, so we can look at how the police are dealing with each other, with their own department. What are the questions being asked? I know early on this summer, internal affairs, there's about 20 years of internal affairs documents, but when they were asked for by members of the public, they were told it was going to be about $10,000 to get those to them. And so that stopped that request process. But that might be something that we want to look into pretty seriously. Because again, that's also looking at what the police know are issues, and how they solve how they determine what is a problem and what's not, and also how they solve that problem or not. So I'll end my really long comment there and open it back up. So is Elizabeth, and then Javier, and then Lois.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. I think one is that back to what Andy mentioned around evidence. I think there was a lot of conversation in our subcommittee about there's so many policies. There's the procedures. There's the field manual. There's a lot of information about how police should be, the Northampton police specifically should be behaving, and what they should be doing when they're on duty. And how do we, and if you look at it, it's pretty thorough, and reality comes up to the place of it's solid police department practices and policies. So it's meeting the standard. And in fact, they have certifications and accreditations from different police affiliated kind of membership organizations that are confirming that they meet policing standards. So when we look at part of what we're looking at, I think, and part of the things I'm interested in is it's not so much are these policies kind of up to snuff when it comes to standard policing, because that's actually been the problem, and that's one of why we're all gathered here today. Is not that's one of the issues. So it's more about when we talk about what's effective, and I feel like we keep avoiding the conversation of metrics. Like, what specific metrics are we talking about? Because if we're talking about effectiveness in terms of general policing, I mean, they're going to be just fine. Northampton Police doesn't have any kind of blip on the radar as any other kind of similar situated police department. But if we're talking about metrics around social justice, we're talking about metrics around human-centered interactions and community protection, and the types of values that we've talked about, but we haven't yet agreed on. Like, what are we doing all this for? Why are we looking at budgets? We're kind of dancing around this. What is effective? What is the outcomes? And what is, how do we know if a training has the outcomes that are effective? Well, the police can set up their own outcomes, on what what training is effective or not. But I don't think that's why we're here. And so, one of the things that I just kind of keep bringing up is I do think we need to have a set of metrics that we're looking at when we're looking at budgets, when we're looking at these policies. Even this idea of a strategic plan, they can give us something, but what is our codex? Like, how are we evaluating it? And we don't have a set evaluation, kind of set of ideals that we're saying we're evaluating these things based on these values and these metrics of this committee. And I feel like we maybe should spend some time really thinking about what those are and agree on them, because or else all this information, all we're doing is reporting back. So I just wanted to bring that up. The other piece is around, this idea of evidence. Again, you're only the evidence is only as good as the information put into it. So, we've discussed in the policy committee about the fact that not only is our complaints kind of self-selected, people who are, they're not going to be all the complaints that are going on in this community, but also the data that police themselves are entering into these databases. Yeah, they can say it's transparent, but the data itself is flawed. The data itself doesn't, they self-report the race of the individuals they're interacting with. And, I myself have been indicated as a white person, and no one asked me, and I don't think I look, particularly Caucasian, but again, it's one of those things that it's not just an experiential point. There is data on the fact that police are, across the country are deliberately identifying race so that they don't come under scrutiny around some of the stops. So we know that are the Northampton Police Department doing that? I don't know, but we can't necessarily trust all of that. But I do understand how it's important to at least gather it. Here's what we have. But when we're gathering it, which is so much work, and so I feel like without some sort of codex, like how are we evaluating that information? To what lens are we looking at it? It feels like we're going to come back to this conversation and just be reporting back again without a kind of a critical view on it. The last thing I'll say is around testimony and how important that is. With all this data, again, it's building a body of evidence, but again, without the two for what, we kind of lose that. But I just want to say that I really hold, and I feel like the power of testimony and the power of witness is actually, it should be weighted. We should weight the power of testimony, the power of witness over, an Excel sheet that comes in. Because first of all, we know it's flawed. There's other issues with it. But we've actually have an overwhelming level of evidence that comes in the form of personal testimony to this committee and also to the city council. So I think, there's no way to put that into an Excel sheet, but I just want to note that, testimony is and witnesses is something that we should really be talking about and thinking about in terms of the how we're holding that with the other data that's coming in. That's all. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Javier and then Namdi.
Thanks, Dan. Hold on, I was sort of writing, so I just want to take a step back. So when we start talking about, we want to know what kind of training they are doing, how they are accessing that training, how they are processing that training, how they are being able to get a hold of that training. Restorative justice training that they just secured with the Northampton Police Department and the Northampton Police Department. I think it's a third police department. I'm going to ask everyone here to go to the website of that organization, giving that restorative justice workshop. And seeing from a point of view as you're not white, you're a person of color, and you're gonna be shocked and taking a look to the website of the organization doing it. I don't have anything against them or favor. I'm just saying that if you're gonna talk about restorative justice, people of color has to lead. It's extremely easy to bring to the table white people to talk to white people. And that's not what needs to happen right now. That's one thing. The second one is that, based on what Elizabeth is saying, I deeply feel that the subcommittee that I co-chair with Booker, and Booker has done way more work than I have done, and thank you so much for that. We are doing deep analysis of what we want to see, how we want to see it, and how we're moving forward. So I would invite Elizabeth and others to attend other subcommittees to learn what we're doing and not have preconceived ideas that we're just reporting back. I think that's extremely important. you know, when we're talking about metrics, I think it's necessary for everyone here, and I take this with the utmost respect for everybody, that I'm taking that a lot of the conversation that we're having is because we want to be clear about our process, and we want to be transparent, and that's the reason why we're moving in this way. That's the reason why we're gathering all this information. When we get to the point of metrics, when we're talking about taking a look to the police logs and seeing why, hopefully no, but maybe most of the people that are in the police logs are people of color, people, unhoused people. We're gonna move there, and I cannot talk about how other subcommittees are approaching this, but I do know that at the subcommittee that I'm part of, we're deeply talking about this. We have that so good conversation about it, and we are moving to do more analysis. I get really worried when we start linking police department and how they work in social justice. I don't get it. I hope I'm gonna get it, but those two terms for me do not function together. We're talking about access of data. Dan just mentioned that a group was asking for documents, and they were told that they needed $10,000 to be able to get those documents. Transparency needs to happen, whether it's in our report or not. That's a baseline for the community to be able to trust. When we're talking about, well, you know, Northampton doesn't have, it's not a major crime city. The Northampton Police Department are not like other cities. I no need to go and take a look to Springfield with their own police department, with their own problem, to reflect good or bad with Northampton. I take the reality of Northampton. I take the reality that in Northampton, when I go downtown, you don't see people of color hanging out. If you see somebody of color, you see that person going from point A to point B as soon as they can. And after that, they are done. We are talking about a police department where a police chief wanted to put surveillance cameras in downtown. So when we're talking about this, I can tell you, you can tell me, well, Northampton doesn't have criminality and all that. Well, yeah, if people are feeling oppressed, and all of a sudden all of the altercations are with homeless people, with young people, and people that have mental disabilities and mental health problems, yeah, that's not us. But that doesn't mean that there is not a complete issue that we need to address. I'm just taking a look to my thingy here. Also, you know, standards are set for police, by police. We're gonna go back to what I just said before. Do we need somebody to explain how police departments were created? To just be able to control slaves and to be able to hunt slaves that were living the South? So again, I want to go back to the essential. I want to go back to say that our job is to change this. Our job is not justify what the police is doing. Because, and I said this at the very beginning, because of the sake of the process, we should have people from the police department to understand their narrative. And that's what we should do. But that is not going to change our goal, which is having to do substantial change in Northampton and how the police department functions.
Great, thank you. So we have Namdi and then Lois.
So I just will follow up and just echo some of what Elizabeth had to say in sympathy with her, the points about rethinking the metrics and also placing some value on testimony. You know, one thing that has come already for me at the work that our subcommittee is doing, you know, looking at existing policies and practices, is that it has led me to questions and suggestions for improving the metrics. Or at least knowing what we kind of want to know emerges from looking at what's presented to us. Although I'm fully cognizant of the fact that the likelihood that the data that are presented are deeply flawed, like complaint data will be incomplete, but it still, there's an enormous amount that can be gained from the complaint data. So to revisit the example I just gave, you know, the police as they currently think of these things have these three categories. It's a crime, it's a violation of policy, and that third category is they call back the complainant and say, you know, your complaint doesn't have merit because it wasn't a crime and it wasn't a violation of policy. Well, you know, our commission can do a lot to kind of correct that policy as it currently exists. I'm imagining whatever's in that third category. I don't know what that is, but by seeing the cases, we're going to find out what those things are, and there could be a number of things that we could, you know, sort of help them think differently about how they judge what's a valid complaint. And so Javier's complaint about people of color not feeling comfortable walking downtown or concerned about being surveilled by cameras, you know, that kind of thing would probably not be a crime or a violation of policy, but would have merit. And so how do we kind of set up a policy that allows those kinds of complaints to get a response other than, you know, this is a not meritorious complaint? On the issue of use of force, you know, again, the website lists out a bunch of use of force incidents, and it attempts to be transparent in a certain way. But what became clear to me once I looked in detail at these reports is that they have a process where use of force is documented by fellow officers, and they have a, you know, kind of a shared sense of reality about when they use force and why they used it. It's probably flawed in the ways that were already said. For example, they make determinations about the racial designation of the person they use force against, which could be flawed. It could be flawed intentionally or unintentionally. I'll just mention in passing, in my work as a racial consultant to mental health agencies throughout the Valley, lots of folks struggle with making accurate determinations of people's races. So I talk to therapists all the time who are asked to fill out paperwork and make guesses about the client's race. And I don't think there needs to be a nefarious reason why people make errors. There might be, or there might not be, why people make errors. But the key thing is when it comes to use of force, police officers have a policy where they make all the judgments of whether they use force, how excessive it was. And what was striking to me right away is there's no data from the person whose the force is used against. So there's nothing in the system that where the person who's actually, you know, the police interacts with gives any information about how much they were harmed or injured or hurt. So that kind of, knowing that seems to me kind of profound. Seems like it's worth taking the trouble to take a look at the data that they have. And it seems like you could do a lot of good by, for example, requiring that, you know, use of force is accompanied by some kind of feedback from the person who had the force used against them, including having them report on their racial background and other kinds of things. So to me, those kinds of exercises are worth doing. Unless you get to a place where you fully abolish the police, I think you want a smarter, leaner police department that does a better job of data collection. And so I think that's the kind of thing that would come from scrutinizing the data that exists carefully. And so coming back to Elizabeth's point, as I'm starting in this road, I'm imagining a lot of the recommendations are going to be about learning more about the perspective of others than the police officer. So I think their system now collects a lot of data from the police perspective and very little from the community perspective. And I think we would want to have much more community perspective, maybe even required in all of the data that they're collecting, which I think would put us in a different position. All right, so that's my 2 cents.
All right, thank you. So then Lois and then Javier again.
I just want to comment, just because Javier brought it up about the restorative justice project that the police had entered into with the DA. And I really, if people haven't looked at that website, I really think you should look at it. I've never heard of a restorative justice program anywhere other than the one that's created by the company or nonprofit or whatever it is that's doing this, that's initiated by the police and the DA, and where the people who are chosen to be part of the restorative justice program are the people that choose are the police, and that the police sit in on the first restorative justice circle and also the end restorative justice circle. I mean, this is just a complete turning upside down of restorative justice. And it's held out as something, the DA said that this was a progressive move for the city and every town that's participated in it. When you look at the website, it's completely, I mean, it is almost completely all white people, and including the person that runs it and started it, and it's completely embedded in the police departments of every town that they work in every city. And so I just mentioned this as a quote police service or program. I don't know, but I don't know if they even started it. But it's people should really take a look at it and look at anything else that's been written about restorative justice, and you will see how completely opposite to it this so-called restorative justice project is here in Northampton.
All right, thank you. So now Javier.
Yeah, sorry for doing it again, but I missed just one thing that Namdi made me remember. And we talked about this before. And I'm going to use myself as an example. Me being this passionate, me being this upfront, and I don't have anything to fear. I can just say it, nothing's going to happen to me. That's privilege. That's my privilege. I'll say whatever I want to say here and feel safe. When we're talking about testimony of affected people, we have to be cognizant that that privilege is not always, most of the time, it's not going to exist. People who have been targeted and again and again and again are people who are gonna, who are obviously don't want to expose themselves to keep being targeted if they come out publicly to share their own struggle and their own experience of being abused by enforcement. So I just want to put that over there. I don't have a solution for that. But I do know that if I have to keep reminding you guys that, as with all the love that I have for you, I will keep doing it, because I think that's important to always have in mind when we're talking about testimonies being central to what we do.
All right, thank you. Lois, you still have your hand up. Did you have something else you wanted to say? All right. So I think that gives us a pretty good overview of what all of the subcommittees are doing. I think one of the things that we all are noticing is that there's a lot that the subcommittees are doing. We can't all be at every single meeting. We can't all do every single thing. That's why there are so many of us. But if you can, we'll work to make sure that all of the subcommittee meetings are up on Northampton Open Media so that you can all watch them. And we'll try, we do have the Google Drive space from the city now officially. Noah's going to be reaching out to make sure that we have the right Google account information for you to add you to that. So we'll transfer all of the things that we've got so far in the drive that I shared with us into the city one. And we'll work on making sure that that's also open and available to the public as well on the Northampton City website. It's multiple layers of getting all these things done. But that will also help us sort of keep track, so you can sort of peruse what files are being shared. Even though we can't necessarily talk about what we're all doing and discuss opinions and things like that outside of these meetings, we can still at least share the information so that we all have it. And we're sharing it out with the public as well, and collecting it from them, right? So people who have experience are invited to send information in as well to us. All right, so transitioning over to the next part of this meeting. I'm sorry, I lost my agenda. There we go. Okay, so the next part is that we do have coming up, we have the public hearing. We do need to make an agenda for that. And then there's also a proposal update for public hearing and interpretation services. So right now we do have the public hearing that's set to start at 6:30. Does anyone want to start with proposals for the agenda itself, which would be like the flow of that hearing? All right, Josie?
Sure. Going back to some of the things that we've talked about in our budget meeting, I would love for there to be some talk about maybe the proposal to have certain ordinances either halted or stopped that impact our houseless population, as well as perhaps some discussion of some of the budget that has already been siphoned away from the police department toward services that impact the material conditions of some of our most vulnerable populations, especially with winter around the corner, would that be the establishment of public restrooms or a warming center, something along the lines, something that can go into this preliminary proposal.
All right, so city ordinances around 10, was it camping? And then the funds that were already cut from the police budget already. As topics to discuss, and then reinvestment opportunities. The one thing I do want to point out, so those are good topics, but we still also need to discuss sort of what the flow is. Are we presenting information sort of like we did here, but sort of a uniform, as a uniform sort of statement? Are we looking to accept public comment first? Do we want to have specific topics that the public comments on as well? All of those sort of things. I'm thinking back to the purposes that we discussed for this as sort of a place to do progress report and to touch base. Booker?
I think it's helpful. It would be helpful both to us. It would be helpful both to me and I think to others if we said, here are the proposals we're currently considering, and we would like your feedback about that. I think it's better sometimes for people to be able to respond to something and hear thought rather than simply doing an open meeting. I have my first proposal would be an initial 30 to 40 minutes of open comment, and then perhaps each committee could pose an issue that they are currently pondering, and that they would like direct feedback around that issue.
Sorry, I was just writing that down to make sure that I've got it on there. So, Nick?
I really like that suggestion, Booker. Specifically, I really liked, I think it was you who talked about a range of, it might have been Carol, a range of police, a range of having police do more, less, or nothing, but having this spectrum of possibilities. And I thought that spectrum idea was very useful because people can then talk about kind of where they view themselves on the spectrum, or where they view the police, where they view the commission recommendations, where they want us to land on the spectrum. And so that gives them something to locate themselves. Thought it was very good. I also like the idea that each committee might pose a question.
Great, thank you. Okay, so Booker again.
I meant to take my hand down. I should do that.
All right.
By the way, spectrum comes from Alex, but all of the range of ideas from my viewpoint come from Carol.
All right. So in that case, we've got a proposal. Lois?
I mean, this is just, I think asking people about, talking about where they fall on the spectrum might not be the best language to use. But I would maybe shy away from that range of activities, maybe. But anyway, I assume that there'll be at least a little bit of time for the committees to report on what we've been doing and what we plan on doing, even if it's, you know, for the next month or something, so that people can have an idea what's been going on and what we've been doing, people that haven't been following it. And I do like the idea of posing questions or 2 or 3 questions for people who are going to be attending to answer, just so that maybe responses are more focused and more useful to us. And I think if we do come up, if each committee comes up with a question or questions, I think that's a good idea. I just think it would be important, again, if we have these questions, if there is a press release or another announcement about the meeting, to say, you know, these are the kinds of questions that we're going to be posing, and we hope people will come prepared to respond to them, among other things. But just put it out there that that's part of the focus of what we're hoping to elicit from people during the hearing.
All right. So just as a note, if we're going to come up with questions to present to people, we either need to do that tonight in this meeting, or leave it to, say, the co-chairs to, or sorry, not the co-chairs, the subcommittee chairs, to reach out to us so that we can put it onto the agenda, but that needs to happen fairly quickly, if that's going to happen. So I think it sounds like we're moving towards a sort of requesting open comment at the beginning, sort of the general, and then and originally it was pose a question. Now we might have pose a couple questions as a group. I'm sorry, as each subcommittee. So posing 2 or 3 questions that we're looking for comment on. The only thing that I think we might want to be mindful of, and this is one of those things, is sort of balancing how much time, like if we ask people to respond to 3 questions per subcommittee, you know, that might garner a lot of talk and have it be a little bit hard to keep track and keep us on time with things. I mean, I'm not against that idea either, because it does, without knowing how many people are going to sort of come to this, it's not like there's an RSVP and we can sort of do the math out. But that does raise an interesting sort of point that we want to be mindful of. And that's something that we also need to sort of discuss as we're creating this agenda, is how long do we want to allocate for public comment for, you know, either each subcommittee, or leave it. I don't think we want to leave it too Wild West once we start to get beyond that general comment. I think I do think it's also important to sort of touch on what Josie had said. So for anyone who wasn't part of our the budget and spending subcommittee, we had talked about one of the things that is immediate is that there's money that was taken from the police department with the goal of reinvesting in the community, and we haven't seen that yet. And there are a number of very salient issues facing people. They've already been brought up. So warming shelters, access to water, access to clean bathrooms downtown. Neither of those things are available at the moment. You know, it's a lot of it is at the discretion of the businesses that are left, and even then, it's a little bit spotty. I know that there were complaints. We heard about complaints about the sanitation, but the state of the restrooms that are down there that are available for the public. And I'll say I experienced that the other day. I was running around downtown and went oh, I have to go to the bathroom, and there's nowhere to go, so I just left and went home, which isn't the end of the world, but I have that option. So thinking about those sort of things, do we want to make statements? I think we were moving towards the commission hopefully making a larger statement about those things, where we can as well, just to say, there are groups that are looking into this. There are some groups that were looking at a warming shelter, and I think there's a proposal for one at one of the churches. I don't know the state of that. I've been trying to figure it out, but those things as well. And whether or not we work that into this upcoming meeting so that we can put something out pretty quickly as a collective as well, if we get feedback from people. All of that was pretty long-winded. I'm going to stop now. Javier and then Booker.
Dana.
Oh, sorry. Dana, Javier, Booker.
Thank you. I just had, I guess, a quick question / comment. I'm not sure when the agenda needs to be done for our meeting for next Tuesday. So I'm assuming that everything is closed Thursday and Friday. Our public office is open tomorrow. I don't know.
I mean, I believe so.
We need 48 business hours, right?
Yeah, I would assume that Friday is still open. It's not an official holiday. It's not a state holiday anyway.
I don't know if it's open.
Yeah, that I can reach out to the city and hopefully get some clarification.
I guess I'm just caution if we are wanting to walk away from this space to create questions or additional agenda items if we don't have time to do that.
I think we are in a safe place in that we've already got the agenda posted, so it wouldn't necessarily be announcing a new meeting. It's just adding and editing. And even if, I think at this point, the worst case scenario, we could still put out the information through like social media and things like, and the press releases as well.
I can also do some research, but I think if we make edits, they should be rather soon, within maybe a day. But I will check.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Did you have anything else, Dana? Javier and then Booker.
Yeah, I understand the usefulness to direct the conversation next week. I understand that, but I just want to point on the table that, as far as I know, I may be wrong. So if I'm wrong, just let me know. Our first priority right now is about outreach and publicity to get as many people as we can. I mean, multilingual publicity, outreach to people who are being more affected. I feel that's our responsibility right now, and that should be set up above any questions that we want to pose to direct the conversation. Maybe coordinating with shelters, see if they can set up a Zoom. Encouraging people to testify. I mean, I think that's paramount if this is going to be a public hearing discussion. I think if we don't get out tonight out of here with a plan to do that, I think that's going to be bad, because I feel that that's our first responsibility.
Thank you. Booker?
I'm not going to talk about what Javier just talked about, because to me, that's really important, because we have the funding to have Spanish interpreting available as part of this meeting. But then how do we contact those who would be able to utilize that? So that's a big issue. I hate to do this. I'm personally against having a discussion about the availability of housing related services as part of this meeting. Although it has something to do with policing, it's not directly involved with policing at the moment. I'm also aware of it because this is what the Human Rights Commission, which I also sit on, has been working on a lot. We actually had Pamela Schwartz, who's doing a lot with how are we setting up housing. My understanding, by the way, is First Churches is about to open 18 or 19 beds for more availability within Northampton. But those issues they're incredibly important. That's not what I'm saying. And it's what the last two Human Rights Commission meetings have been about. The issues in terms of this being about a policing report, that is a little bit separate. Though, by the way, some of our meetings for the next alternatives to policing meeting, we may have more of a discussion about the implications of housing and policing, but that's a little bit different from what do we do now to get more bathrooms, other services, the fact that the library is closed, how do you do safe COVID stuff? I know that there is work going on about this in Northampton. The question is when is it going to happen? Of course, if people want to bring it up, I'm not going to argue with that, but this is not sitting at the core of what we're working on at the moment.
All right, we'll go Josie and then Nick, and then I'll throw myself in line as well.
So I definitely understand where you're coming from, Booker, in the regards of that it is not directly policing related, but policing adjacent. But I would also argue that all of these topics, in terms of looking at policing practices, looking at crime and why crime happens, are intimately interwoven with one another. When we look at why crime happens, right, we look at people's material conditions that cause them to commit crime or put themselves in vulnerable positions where they do things out of necessity. And through addressing people's needs, through their material needs, do we lower those those behaviors, those actions. And through lowering those things, we then start to take away the very need for policing in the first place, which thus justifies our reason to defund the police and then also put those funds toward very important services. Is it the police directly talking to these people related? No. But to say that these things are not related kind of ignores the real kind of interactions that happen there when people are put in a corner of being houseless, put in a corner of not having access to a bathroom. So where do they go to the bathroom, right? They go on the street, and that becomes a crime, right? Public urination becomes a crime. So I would still push that all of these things are interconnected in a very intimate way, and that is it looking at certain parts of the policing budget be like, oh, this is directly linked to this? No, but I still caution us to look at the implications of the people who reside within Northampton and the reasons they act the way they do and what needs could be addressed with some of the funding that we are taking away from policing that would thus also prevent the need for the police in the first place.
All right, thank you, Josie. And then Nick, and then myself, and then Alex.
I'm just thinking out loud here. Josie, your points are absolutely on target, but it's one of so many categories of issues that affect policing. There's mental health, there's autism, there's just a number of areas that, and so what I just want to say is I'm starting to think that we don't need to pose a question. I'm starting to lean in that direction. I think that the community, the people who have spoken to us so far have such specific ideas and thoughts that they want to share. I'm just saying, I'm not sure we need to put the question out there. I did a few minutes ago and I've just changed.
All right, thank you. I guess I'm gonna go myself and then Alex. I think I'm going to agree with Josie about at least the importance of looking into this seriously as a commission pretty soon. It doesn't necessarily have to be something that we present on, you know, a week from now, and it could be that we make a statement of support or something like that as a collective body to the city in efforts of bolstering these things. It sounds like they're already happening, but you know, we could also talk about how, and this is something that, you know, as spending spending in contracts, and we think about, well, what are we doing? Where's our money going? How can we use it to you know, prevent contact with the police, right? Like one of the things that was identified, that's been identified numerous different ways, numerous different fields, is that the people who are unhoused are over policed. In fact, in Northampton, there was the recent example of someone calling the police because of houseless people being in Pulaski Park, and this person didn't like it. And the police responded saying, "We can't go police them because we're short-staffed." And that response isn't, and you know, they publicize this, and that response isn't terrible, because we do want to have, you know, people have a right to be in a public park, and we don't necessarily want to police them. But it also speaks to people looking to police houseless folks in this community, in this area right now. And if the police had shown up, what would happen? Would it be asking these people to move to another location? Would it be searching them? Would it lead to an arrest? Would it lead to all of these other things? And if we're talking about sort of looking at city ordinances around tents, or if we're talking about having actual spaces that are clean and safe, that people feel safe going to, you know, that also cuts down. That's a direct space, and we can talk about what funds are available, what do we have now, especially during the pandemic, but looking, you know, future as well. Like, it's been cold before. It gets cold every year. It will always get cold. Well, likely get cold depending on how things turn out with global warming, but it's always going to it's probably going to be colder next year as well. So looking at what we can do in the immediate, and also funding for the future too. So I think those are things that we could either offer help, or statements to bolster. Again, I think that could be something that either the budgets and spending subcommittee does. If we're presenting ideas and questions, we could ask about what people want to see, and what we've received as requests for proposals. If we move to not asking questions and just accepting comments, maybe that's a little bit less important for this upcoming meeting. Anyway, that's what I'll say on that. Alex, and then Lois.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that Josie brought these issues up, and think that at the Alternatives Policing Subcommittee, this is very much something that we should be looking at, and we are going to be looking at housing at our next subcommittee on December 2nd. The city also has an ordinance review committee happening right now, and they are looking at issues like this, and the public is welcome to come and make suggestions there and push them in that direction. But I think in terms of what our public hearing is specifically geared toward, you know, hearing from the public, and so I would advocate for, if we have a brief reports from the three subcommittees, and could touch on all of the issues that we've discussed, including the ones that Josie has brought up, but have that be brief, and spend as much time as we can hearing from the public, and then also public hearings usually allow for more back and forth than public comment in terms of specifically asking questions. So if a member of this body wants to get at more clarification from someone who is speaking, we can ask for that. And the time limits are usually not as restrictive, but the person does need to stay on point, and the chair would be the person who would decide, are they on topic? Uh, so just a few thoughts there, but trying to keep it so that we can hear from people as much as possible.
All right, thank you. Lois, and then David.
I like the idea of being able to, for people on the commission to also ask questions rather than just be sort of sitting there listening, and to be able to engage someone who's speaking or spoken. So, I mean, yeah, we can put some kind of time limit on each person, but I think it would be good to have that. And in favor of that. And I mean, I hope that even if this commission decides not to say anything about what's currently going on and how people will be criminalized this winter, hope that at least the budget committee will be able to do that. And I also hope that we'll make some comment about where the money that was taken from the police budget and where it is now, which is nowhere. And even in a time of pandemic. And so I'm in favor of either, if the commission can't resolve to do that, I hope that at least our budget committee will do it. Because it is, after all, a budget issue. So that's, I hope that either the commission agrees to, which seems, I don't know, likely, I guess, but I hope that we can agree among the spending committee to acknowledge that this is what's going on, but pretend that it's not happening. That these things are not happening.
All right, thank you, Lois. David.
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge Josie's comments as well. I think they're reflective of what we hear all the time from our public comment, and I think they probably are comments that most of us share to some degree or another. I would love to, I hope that I live long enough to live in a community where the police aren't needed. I'm dubious that I will, but that's something that I think I hope for, and I think that all of us hope for. I'm wondering, though, in terms of where we end up with this group in the real world, is probably something short of let's get rid of all police officers for everything. I doubt that that's going to be the result of this organization. I think it's probably, we're going to be on some sliding scale of, the way I keep phrasing it is reducing the footprint of the police. We want less police involved in less things. So I'm wondering whether it makes sense to focus the public hearing by asking the people participating a simple question. Where do we start? I've referred to, in both tonight and in our subcommittee meeting, as to low-hanging fruit. And for me, those are just things that I think would be easy to make real change in. But that's just my opinion. I mean, other people may have other things. And I'd be interested in terms of what the public says. If we phrase this, that look, we are starting down a road, in my view, of less police involved in fewer aspects of our daily lives. Where do we start that process? I'd be interested in the public response to that.
All right, thank you. So Javier and then Namdi.
Yeah, I'm taking what David is saying. I would like to be. I would like to people to come. I'm gonna state it again. We have 20 minutes, and I don't feel we have a plan about how to bring folks, affected folks, or anybody to the table. Besides the press release, there is not a Facebook page. There is nothing. I'm not saying we should do one, but I would like. If it's possible, I would like Dan as a chair to recognize Jose Adastra, because I would like to ask, as Jose is somebody who has stated several times that he is working with people in the street proactively, what would be a good strategy to reach that kind of people for us to be able to have their testimony? If that's appropriate, and if that's something that I'm sort of asking to the chair.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see why not. That's something that we could do. Do you want to respect the order though? So
absolutely.
Namdi and then Jose, if you're comfortable, I'll ask what you see as an effective way to encourage communication and participation. So
yeah, so echoing David's point, you're requesting a kind of public comment on low-hanging fruit. I like that idea. I support that idea, and maybe I would want to amend it or add to it in the same spirit of what I brought up earlier about thinking about when do we bring in the police voice. So I guess what I would suggest is asking for public comment on what would be, in the public's perception, low-hanging fruit, places that are clearly where we should get police out. You know, where people can point to, you know, no place for police. I'd love to hear also, where have police been useful? So if I'd like to hear public comment about, you know, here was a time when a police officer actually was helpful in my life, and let's keep them involved for this role. And I think having some kind of sense of those kinds of extreme anchors would be useful in our process. You know, so there may be places where we easily cut, and other places where we can easily see we definitely want to retain this essential work, because, you know, there's enough public comment around the utility of this one particular function. Those are my 2 cents.
all right, thank you. Jose, if you're comfortable, I'm going to ask you to unmute just to provide ideas of where the commission might be able to help people or bring them in.
Dan, if I can sort of rephrase a little bit the question, and I'm really sorry, Jose, for putting you in the spot, but I see you sort of every meeting, and you have been in our subcommittee meetings too. And I'm whether we go or not, which it looks like we're not going there or planning how to do outreach and actually have people. I'm highly interested in your input about how we can reach out the affected community. You know, it's one of the things that I thought was maybe working with shelters and see how they can set up Zoom for people in the shelter, but I don't really know. So I would like to hear your thoughts about that.
Hi, thank you. So we could probably set up, my daughter's in the background here, so excuse the noise. We could probably set up like a Zoom session over the phone for a specific date. For some people, sometimes we're dealing with like a range of folks with a range of, you know, sort of mental states and challenges. So sometimes it's hard to organize everyone all at once, and that's really the only way we can do it. So, you know, I think, come here. I think there would be a, you know, there's a little chaos behind getting everyone together in the park, but, you know, there's, you know, Tay has been to other meetings, and she has been getting meetings together in the park, so we can coordinate with her. Something that might be easier is getting pre-recorded testimonies. You know, I know that it's really important for everyone to want to, it seems like people want some sort of live public comment. So we can try to do that for sure if that's helpful. Something that would be helpful is having a little flexibility, you know, because like, you know, sometimes someone may show up late or something, so being able to bounce back to them might be good. Is there anything else you wanted me to cover?
Well, I think you throw a lot of ideas that I hopefully we're going to consider and we're going to sort of plan accordingly. Thank you so much, Jose, for your thoughts.
I'm going to jump just a little bit, and this is something Cynthia can probably speak to as well, because we brought this up in the last meeting, the last general meeting, about working around the requirements for safety protocols for large gatherings, or really any gatherings, and sort of what that might look like. So probably not for this upcoming meeting, in terms of doing larger scale things, but how we could set up a space that was outdoors, socially distant enough, and had, you know, a small enough group that we could gather and, you know, get comment from people. And one of the things this also brings up is an interesting tension of, you know, if we're talking about when policing hasn't worked for people, and who's comfortable making those statements and saying policing hasn't worked for me and here's why, that we do get into a sort of very vulnerable population. And this is something I haven't figured out the answer to, sort of bouncing back ideas, where we get to how do we protect someone's anonymity if they wanted it, but also have something be a public record as well. And this is not something that's going to be easy. I don't think we're going to solve it in the next 15 minutes. To have immediately ready, but it's something to think about as well, as we look to include people who may have been harmed, or who might be in fear of being harmed in the future if they speak on these sort of things. So it is going to be a balancing act for those tensions. And I see Elizabeth has her hand up.
Yeah, I just have a really quick question about that in terms of public record and public comment. I'm wondering what the, if we can pose it as a research question to the city, because my understanding, the comment just has to be logged. You can say my name is Jane, you know, and move into you know, your comment. So I'm just wondering what the standard is for public comment, if it does have to be an identifiable, you know, kind of person with their address and all these sorts of things, or it's just the fact that the comment itself is done in a public forum so that everyone can hear. So I'm just wondering what that standard is. Might give us some more options for anonymity. And Zoom is actually really good for that. We could give people a filter that they could use that would give them anonymity, but allow them to make their comment.
Yeah, I know that the city council does allow for that. When I talked to the city council president, she had mentioned that she allowed people to testify under pseudonyms as well, but I don't know exactly what the process is, or if there's like thresholds, because there is a tension for really wanting to know who is making comments, where they're from, and things like that. But again, that's something we can sort of tease out. I don't think that there's like a super hard and fast rule, and I would prefer personally, and this is just myself, I'm not going to make any decisions for the commission as a whole without group input, but for myself, I would really like to make sure that we're creating a space for people to share experiences where they might not otherwise have felt they had recourse. Right, and so we talked about sort of, you know, people self-selecting on who makes complaints, and making sure that they feel comfortable if there is something that they want to allege, that they feel okay relating that experience in a way that's meaningful. Just so that we're clear, I don't think, do we want to try and make accommodations for the first public hearing in these spaces? I mean, I'm okay with trying. I do want to respect that we have 12 more minutes scheduled for that. We still also do need to decide on what the public hearing format will be. That might even impact what we're sort of collecting for comments, if we're collecting comments from people as well. We have 3 separate proposals that have sort of been talked about. One is having public comment, and then every subcommittee poses a question or a couple questions that they would like feedback on. So that's one model. Another is each subcommittee provides a short update, and then we leave the floor open to public comment and back and forth. And the third is, I guess, a really general, just asking the question, where do we start in this process? Where do police belong or not? Or asking the question, where are police useful or not? And asking those as the prompts for the public comment. So I guess there are 3 questions that I'm going to throw out. So one, do we want to, are folks interested in trying to set up something for the December 1st public hearing, which does not give us a lot of time? If they are, what do they want to set up? I'm going to leave those questions open. And then the third, what's the form that this public hearing is going to take? Out of those 3, do we have questions or areas that we want to move to? Booker?
I don't think we have time to set up something different. What I intend to do is I think we need to do some different kinds of outreach to get more people in. So I'm planning to write to the Pioneer Valley Workers Center, planning on writing to people I know who are involved with Ministry in the Night and others to say, are there ways that you can bring these other voices in? I think I don't know how we would rearrange circumstances at the moment for our currently planned meeting. By the way, a lot of the people we're talking to, if they're without homes, they might be in shelters by the time that we are starting our meeting. And sort of, unless they have something within the shelter that would allow them to participate. So I think if we're really interested in getting people without homes into our discussions, we're going to have to plan for midday meetings when people are not within circumstances that they have to get to, otherwise they don't have a place to be warm. But my plan, my own personal plan, is to try to contact other contacts that I'm aware of in the city and ask, can they bring more people involved? And and I'd have to leave it to them to do that. I'm particularly interested, since I did this work about getting interpreting available, of having people who would want to make use of a interpreting service as part of the call. So I'll stop there.
Okay, so we have Booker using some context. I don't think we necessarily have to go too deep into it in this if we're okay with putting forward some ideas. If people are willing to use their personal contacts or affiliations with organizations, that would be great. And I plan on doing the same thing with some of the groups that I'm aware of, and at least getting the flyer, linking to there's a Gazette article that announces this, as well as the city website and the Facebook group. So there are ways to sort of get that out there a little bit. The Facebook group should have the image, so we can also download that and send it. If folks were interested in translating that into Spanish or another language, we can also send that out as well to make sure that these announcements are going out and getting the language as well. So we'll move to Lois.
Yeah, I'll also work on getting the word out, and in the next weeks, whatever. I hope that it includes that interpretation. There'll be Spanish simultaneous interpretation, which isn't on that first one that went out. In terms of what the actual hearing should be, I still favor having some kind of representation from each of the committees, and if we pose any question at all, I still think it's a good idea. I like Namdi's idea of what would you see the police doing, or your experiences that have been, I can't remember exactly how you phrased it, but you can phrase it again, and to ask those two questions just as a way of having some focus of people's responses. And again, I also want us to be able to, if we have a question, to be able to ask that question.
All right. So we've got maybe looking towards the third model for this, just accepting broad comments with the questions of sort of what has worked or what works or what doesn't work. We'll rephrase that. David?
Yeah, given the hour and given the fact that I think we've had a fairly good discussion of different options, and just speaking for myself personally, I don't feel strongly about any of them. I would move that we allow the co-chairs to set forth the precise format of how the public hearing would be run.
Seconded.
Okay. So in that case, Noah, can you run us through a roll call?
Absolutely. Dan?
I'm going to abstain. Oh,
Sorry, just to make sure that no one has any discussion on that motion before we go right to a roll call.
Josie?
Yeah, I feel the same way, but I kind of feel bad just dropping it in the laps of the co-chairs. How do y'all feel about having that responsibility, I guess, is what I would like to know.
Dana, do you want to respond?
I kind of feel bad about it too, but I don't feel that bad, Dan.
I'm still muted.
Take it out. Despite Dana's frown, I think you guys. I mean, I'm trying to propose just a common sense solution here, given that we've been meeting for 3 hours, and I don't think there's a huge difference in what others are proposing. I mean, as I said, I don't feel strongly about any of them. So yeah, I mean, I kind of, like Josie, feel bad dumping this on you, but comes with territory, I guess.
I mean, I'll say if it's left up to us, I would strongly move for the second option, which is short updates. I'm thinking like 5-minute maximum update, if not less, from the commission, because that's sort of the middle of two worlds. It both sort of gives an idea, it gives, you're sort of leading people in with what comments you're looking for, because you're telling them what you're doing, and people do naturally respond to things. And then it also leaves it pretty open. Most of the time would be available for public comment. So I'm fine with that. I'll just let everybody know that's, if you're putting this in my lap, that's where I'm going. And I don't know about Dana, but we would probably meet and discuss it.
I agree. I think number 2 would have been my top choice. I think it gives a good overview of what subcommittees have been working on and an ability to respond to that.
Nick?
I just want to clarify if that also includes asking the question of where do we start and what do we want to leave that might work?
I mean, we could pose the question there, and we can even put it in the media that goes out, but it wouldn't, I mean, in this scenario, we're just leaving it very open, right? Like the public comment was just wide open.
With no suggested question added to it.
Correct.
Okay.
Carol?
Yeah, I sort of think that the question that Nick was alluding to that we discussed earlier is very open-ended and doesn't really preclude people who are on the call from testifying the way they want or need to. Like just the broad question after the updates from the subcommittees or the brief overview, just to pose the question, you know, the larger question for this commission is what is, you know, given that there's a police force, there's an NPD, you know, what are people's experiences that could, you know, testify to the value of having police involved in some things or getting them the heck out of certain other activities and responses. You know, I mean, to me, that's a broad and open-ended question. That's not predetermining what people choose to testify about. Just saying.
Javier?
I just want to flag that posing that kind of question can create a false narrative. Oh yeah, we just heard about people who has find the police has been really nice to them, because we haven't really addressed the fact of having effective voices on the table and how that's going to function. So having a question like that is it's gonna start creating an overall false narrative.
All right, so all of that being said, we still have David's motion on the table. Is there any more discussion around that? Namdi, I think I saw you.
No, just remind you that I seconded it, that's all. We can go on.
So we still need to either amend that, and at this point, I don't know what we would amend it to. Or we need to vote on it, or it can be withdrawn. So is there any other discussion for this? All right. Oh, Booker?
No, what I've heard, I'm just going to say, what I've heard is David's motion is asking the two co-chairs to make the decision. We've actually just heard from you what you would prefer to do, and I actually think that's a really great plan. And I'm very much for it, of each committee giving a small report and then letting the public respond. I have a feeling we may not fill the 3 hours, and so some of these other suggestions may percolate up to the surface anyway. So, but I totally trust the two of you to play with that, and that, you know, I'll stop there.
Okay. Namdi?
Sorry to interrupt, but it strikes me that the discussion that we took the trouble to have did seem to yield a consensus that I think everyone who spoke in the discussion phase, they'd like to have a question out there that probes for positive and negative experiences with policing. So I guess since we went to the trouble of adding that discussion phase, I would like to see the co-chairs pull that into what it is that they frame. I think that's what I heard, unless, you know, aside from the idea that might yield a false narrative, which was the objection to it. You know, it seems to me that we could, you know, we don't know what the narratives are going to be until we hear them, but it seems like people would like to hear them.
Okay, so we have Javier, then Nick, and then I'll throw myself in there as well.
Yeah, my position is that we should not have a question, and I'm gonna go back to the false narrative. If we haven't done the work proactively, not now, but from last week, that we should have done to be able to actually resolve because all the question about how to bring affected voices, how to address people who are gonna are gonna be fearful toward retaliation. We didn't answer any of that. And the only way how we ended up strategizing, which I don't feel it is really strategizing, is like, okay, each one is going to sort of tap their network, and that's it. I feel that because of it, it's going to be pervasive to pose a question that people with the means and the privilege to be able to come to a meeting for hours are going to be given a possible one-sided, just for not being absolutist, a possible one-sided version of what the community wants. And that's the reason why I'm talking about a false narrative.
All right, Nick, and then myself.
I want to say that I can't fully agree to the plan, and it's too late to have further discussion. It's not important enough to delay this at this point. I would like to move ahead, but I just want to say that I don't completely agree about the false narrative, and but I can go with letting the co-chairs make a decision, given that it's this late.
All right, awesome. I'll just offer the one last one is that I also share Javier's concerns about who we're inviting and what we're inviting, and we're sort of buying into the sort of idea that you have to have both sides of an issue. But I think we all know that you don't really need to have, like, we're setting up the idea first that there are sides, that everyone engaged in this process is that is somehow engaged in either public safety or policing. Really, they're all about community safety and crisis response, right? But we're setting up the idea of sides and then saying, well, we have to hear both of them. And I don't think in many spaces we need to hear both, right? Like the examples already brought up about environmental justice. We could talk about racial justice in the same way. Do we really need to hear, from different groups? And I'm not going to say the police are the KKK, but we need to hear from the KKK as well, right? Right, we don't need to hear from the sides of the oppressor in these situations. At least that's my sense and feeling going forward. So if it were up to me, that wouldn't really be a question that I would pose directly. There are other ways that we can do this, and this is going back to Elizabeth's experience, right? So thinking about what are the metrics, what makes a safe, like what tells us that something is working or not. And having that be what guides that sort of larger, broader response of what are our values and how are we making sure that they're being met with a particular framework. So I think I would lean more towards that as looking at that, looking at ways to sort of understand yes or no on that. All of that being said, we're now a little bit over for time. But is there any other discussion that we would like to have before we go through a vote that is just Dana and myself setting up the agenda for the December 1st meeting? Okay. Noah, can you go through a quick call for us?
Yes. Dan.
I'm going to abstain.
Nick.
Yes.
David.
Yes.
Alex.
Yes.
Javier.
Yes.
Dana.
Yes.
Carol.
Yes.
Namdi.
No.
Josie.
Yes.
Cynthia.
Yes.
Lois,
Yes.
and Elizabeth.
Yes.
All right, so that passes. So Dana and I will figure out something for the structure of the public hearing, and we'll have that out tomorrow morning so that it can be distributed and the website be updated and all of those fun things that the city requires. We still do have 2 other items of business: the police attendance at committee and subcommittee meetings, as well as new business. And I also have a quick message from Alex asking to share this because I need to step away. If we get to the police attendance and subcommittee meeting, that they believe that it's important to get the perspective of the police, even if we do not agree with that perspective. Before the last budget, they met with the mayor, finance director, and the police chief and found it very informative in making decisions, even if there was an agreement with all of their positions. I just wanted to read that out before I forgot. So it's there. We do, I guess the question is, looking at the time, do we want to table the police attendance for the next meeting so that we can end this? And would somebody like to make a motion?
Are you looking for a motion to adjourn?
We still need to decide what we're doing with the discussion for the police attendance and whether we're tabling that for the next, until the next meeting.
Would be appropriate a motion to table 5 and 6?
Yeah.
Seconded.
Awesome. Is there any discussion about tabling these things? All right, Noah, can you please do a call again?
Yes. Dan,
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Alex,
They stepped out.
sorry, Javier,
Yeah.
Dana,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
Namdi,
Yes.
Josie,
Yes.
Cynthia,
Yes.
Lois, Elizabeth. Oh, and Booker. I feel like I
Yeah,
forgot.
you skipped me on the last
I'm
one. I
so
would have voted
sorry.
on yes, that one too.
Yes.
All right, so that passes. We will table those and make them part of the next commission meeting as the agenda take up. And then finally, we're looking at adjourning.
Motion to adjourn.
Seconded. Noah, can you call us one last time?
Yep. Dan,
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Javier,
Yes.
Dana,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
Namdi,
Yes.
Josie,
Yes.
Cynthia,
Yes.
Lois,
Yes.
Elizabeth,
Yes.
and Booker.
Yes.
All right, we are adjourned. Thank you all and see you next week.